How you doing, everybody? Hope you're having a good day. Uh, yeah, it's kind of nice today, but in about 4 days it's supposed to be up to around 99 to 100 degrees, which is kind of strange. But anyway, we'll just have to deal with that when it gets there. I'm not worried about it. Uh, the lesson today is going to be a sensitive one for a lot of people because we're talking about politics versus faith. And really, some people do not know how to separate the two. They don't understand the difference. And so we're going to realize that. See, in a couple months, we're going to be choosing sides. And the choices we make will have an impact on our lives and the lives of our children and our grandchildren. And we all know that. You probably heard all sorts of ads on the radio. This is the most important election of our lives. And every one of them is. And then, of course, we know that we have two major parties, and it's a choice of one of the two. We have the Democrats on one side who basically have removed themselves from God and tried to get rid of God totally from their platform. But we also say that the mention of God in the Republican platform is nothing more than pandering for votes, because they have the same thoughts and ideas. And while Democrats feel that the abortion is a right of the mother to choose, we also realize that Republicans could have outlawed the practice many times that they've had control of Congress. But they have not done so. And I'm still waiting for the Republicans to denounce same-sex marriage. But that's not going to happen. In fact, I haven't even heard Republicans talking about the pedophiles that are going around and getting authorization to practice their insanity, their evil ways with children. And because here in California, they've even made it allowed that as long as the child is within 10 years of your age, you can have relations with them. So an 18-year-old can have relations with an 8-year-old as long as it's consenting. And that's what they're all going to claim. You know, that's like whenever people charged with rape. Well, it was consensual. And, I mean, it's all of a sudden becomes my word against his word or her word. So we're waiting for politics to come through and do something right. And so, depending on which view you want to take, it's come to the point that if you vote Democrat, you're anti-God. And if you vote Republican, yeah, you're standing up for godly principles. Well, that's not really the case. And some people reverse the parties. You know, I've heard them say, well, the Democrats are doing God's work. And, of course, when you look at it and investigate it, that's not true. And, of course, Republicans make the same charge, but that's not true either. Now, we are taught in Daniel 2 that God does control the affairs of men, and he appoints governments and those that are in power. And we just cannot assume that God will bring about a positive choice this election, because there have been many countries in the history of this world where some really evil people have been in charge of their various governments. Why did God allow that? Well, maybe he had a purpose for it. So God does bring people and governments to power. God also removes them from power as well. It all depends on how they do it, how they react. I mean, Daniel is a good example when you look at King Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, he was doing fine until he got full of himself and thought that he was just as good as God. Then all of a sudden he was humbled. So it appears that the events taking place in this country could be a punishment from God. I mean, let's face it, our cities are burning, the forests are burning, all this stuff is going on. We have all these evil talking out there. And people calling people names, all sorts of stuff is going on. And really, people usually get what they deserve. And in this case, yeah, the people of this country have turned their back on God. So God's allowing them to be punished. God's allowing them to be persecuted. God is allowing them to be having different things happen to them, and all in the hopes, just like he did in the past, maybe if I give them enough hardship, they'll want to turn back and do this. So God punished the people in the hope that they would realize their sins and determine to change course and start serving God again. See, we're at that point in our country's history. And sadly, many choose not to learn from history. And so when we tell people they need to repent of their sins, put away their sins, and then God will bless this country, well, they're not willing to give up their sins. They want the blessings, to be sure. That they really want that. But they're not willing to give up their sin, so it's not going to happen. See, Christians need to learn that neither political party nor any party shares Christian values. Like I said, the demonstration of Christian values is used for the purpose of securing votes. So do not vote Republican just because your spiritual leaders tell you to, and each person must decide for themselves which candidate will best serve not only their own interest, but the interest of the American people at large. And do not vote for a Democrat just because some spiritual leader or some community leader tells you you need to vote Democrat. And if you don't vote Democrat, you're a traitor to your race, or you're a traitor to the cause. I mean, don't let anyone intimidate you to vote a particular way. I mean, choose for yourself. And your vote must remain private. I mean, that's your choice. And you might spout one thing, but then go in and pull the lever for somebody else or push the button for somebody else. I mean, so think of it this way. The very central verse of the entire Bible is Psalm 118 and verse 8. And it is the middle verse in several of our translations. And it is very appropriate for us to remember. It says, "It is better to trust in the Lord than to trust in man." I mean, you couldn't say it any better than that. It is better to trust in the Lord than to trust in man, in any man. So what every Christian needs to realize is that no one man, nor should a group of men, be trusted over our God. Our trust should be in God and not in man. See, only God can be counted on to keep his promises. Only God has the power to do what he says he will do. And God's ways are right and clean. And his law is perfect. You know, read Psalm 19, 7 through 10. I mean, it tells you all the ways of God are right and perfect, and they accomplish what they're supposed to accomplish. So Christ is our King, and our utmost allegiance needs to be directed to him. You know, we get upset when people leave God out of the Pledge of Allegiance. Well, that's not right. They should have one nation under God. And the thing is, should Christians really be saying the Pledge of Allegiance? Well, as long as they keep their politics and their religion separate, yeah, I mean, that's okay. I mean, it's good to be patriotic. It's nice to love your country, and we really do love the freedoms we have here compared to what many in this world have. But when it comes to God or man, we've got to go with God. And so whether the phrase "under God" is in the Pledge of Allegiance or not, I mean, we're pledging allegiance to a flag for what it represents, this country. And there's so many people that hate this country. That's why they want to get rid of the "under God" from that. They want to get "in God we trust" off of our money. And they say it's repulsive and offensive. Well, them shoving their sins down our throats all the time is repulsive and offensive to many of us. But do they care? No, we're in the minority. And so they don't care, and they're going to continue doing it. So we are going to continue to have problems unless we have a massive amount of people give up their sins and start serving God. Now, we also realize that there are a few faithful Christians left in this country. Now, when I say few, well, I mean, I'm not talking about a handful. There's literally thousands across this land. And I think it's because of those who are faithful are probably the only reason this nation has not fallen either into a dictatorship or a Marxist government or some other form of government. See, God's patience will eventually wear out. Just like it did with the Israelites, God's patience is going to wear out. And we had better stand up for Jesus now before God chooses to end this country. You know, with any dictatorship or Marxist government, there's absolutely no freedom of religion. No freedom at all. Let's say the Muslims set up their caliphate. You're not allowed to practice Christianity or Judaism or anything else under their rule. And so if you don't observe the Muslim rule, they have no problem killing you. And so, yeah, it's going to be bad. And so we have to understand that. To align yourself with Jesus will most likely bring punishment, to be sure. The nature of the punishment might be in measure based on certain factors, but we know in this world, if you align yourself with Jesus, they'll take your head off, they'll kill you, they'll execute you, or they'll throw you into prison. And so there is no freedom of religion, and we will have to suffer a punishment if we stick with Jesus. All right, we may have to follow the example of the Christian martyrs of times past. I mean, we may have to choose life, death, before we succumb to the will of a dictator and, of course, his controlling allies or her controlling allies. See, the good news is that we do not need to wait until the election to make a right choice. No, as Joshua of old said, choose ye this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Joshua 24:15. So, as in the past, the fortunes of this country rest upon the decision of men to serve God or to reject Him. Now, when they reject God, there's only punishment and calamity are waiting for them because they have rejected God. But the people who seek God have a hope of an eternal bliss. So we need to make sure we're making the right choice. We don't want to be making choices based on what someone tells us to do. We've got to look and see what's right. I've seen the billboard across several states in different places, vote godly values. I mean, when you start doing that, you start looking and you see some parties, they have godly values, and others are basically anti-God. And so everybody has to make the choice. And then trying to equate your Christianity with your party, I mean, if you don't vote this, you're not a good Christian. Okay, that's kind of taken to the extreme. I mean, for some of us, we can't understand how a Christian could support some of these things, and they say the same thing. How can you support a man who's immoral? Well, how can you support a party that's immoral? So, I mean, it goes both ways, and the charges are there. But folks, we have a privilege to make a choice in this country, and we should take advantage of that. But do your best to vote godly values, and stick on God's side. You know, we need to be on the Lord's side. You know, we sing that song, I am on the Lord's side. Master, here am I. If we're going to be a child of God, we're going to have to be on His side, and we're going to have to be leading people to His side. And I'm not talking about a political party. I'm talking about the Christian faith. To serve and obey Christ, obey the gospel of Jesus Christ, and become a child of God. And then live faithfully the rest of your life. That's what it's all about. And so don't get tied up so much in the politics, because that's just the product of mankind's way of doing things. Seek and learn what God wants you to do, and choose that. That's the better choice. We have that day, and so we have today to do that. Today is the day of salvation, as Paul told the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians 6 and verse 2. All right, so that's our lesson for today. Very simple lesson, but something to consider and think about. And Lord willing, we'll be back here tomorrow with another lesson. Okay, bye-bye for now.